People love to romanticize Scorpio Venus. They say they love deeply, they're loyal, they're passionate. But when you actually listen to their real experiences, it's a little more complicated than that because a lot of them aren't just falling in love, they're getting pulled into something that feels intense, consuming, and sometimes hard to control. And what's interesting is if you listen closely, a lot of Scorpio Venus individuals will tell you the same thing. They've felt something so strong, so all encompassing that they thought it had to be love. But later on, they start to question it. So the question becomes, what are they actually experiencing and why does it hit this hard for them? When you start looking into it, one word comes up again and again: limerence. Not love, but something that feels almost identical to it in the moment. A lot of Scorpio Venus individuals describe meeting someone and almost instantly something clicks. It's not casual attraction, it's not just interest, it feels intense, magnetic, consuming. They're thinking about this person constantly, replaying conversations, analyzing every interaction, picking up on small shifts in energy. And in that state, it doesn't feel irrational, it feels important. Like there's something about this connection that needs to be understood or pursued. But here's where it gets complicated because just as quickly as that intensity builds, it can fade, especially if there's nothing real underneath it, no compatibility, no emotional stability, no foundation beyond that initial pull. And that's when a lot of Scorpio Venus start to realize what they felt wasn't actually love, it was limerence, something that creates the illusion of depth without always having the substance to support it. Because for a lot of Scorpio Venus, it follows a very specific pattern. It usually starts with an initial moment, something small, conversation, eye contact, a certain type of energy. But it feels different, it stands out, and almost immediately there's a sense of curiosity, like there's something here. From there, it starts to build. They begin thinking about the person more often, replaying interactions, noticing details, picking up on things other people might overlook. And at this stage, it still feels relatively harmless. But then it deepens. Now it's not just curiosity, it's emotional. They start feeling pulled toward the person, even without much actually happening between them. And this is where the mental loop kicks in. They start analyzing everything: what the person said, how they said it, what they might have meant, what they're feeling but not expressing. And the more they think about it, the stronger the attachment becomes, even if the interaction itself is minimal. And what makes this even more interesting is that it's not random. There are very specific types of dynamics that tend to trigger this because Scorpio Venus isn't necessarily drawn to what's easy or obvious or straightforward. They're drawn to depth, to intensity, to what isn't fully revealed. So when someone is a little hard to read, emotionally complex, inconsistent, or even slightly unavailable, it doesn't push them away, it pulls them in because now there's something to figure out. And Scorpio Venus doesn't just want connection. They want to understand, they want to read between the lines, decode behavior, figure out what someone really feels underneath what they're showing. Um, so when a person isn't fully open or clear, it activates that instinct even more. And that's where it can turn into a loop. They feel the intensity, they try to understand it, they analyze the person, and that analysis deepens the attachment. And before they even realize what's happening, they're emotionally invested in something that hasn't actually developed in reality. Once that emotional attachment forms, it doesn't just stay internal. It starts to show up in their emotional responses, especially around jealousy and possessiveness. Now, this is where Scorpio Venus can look very different depending on the person. Some are very aware of it. They feel those emotions, but they don't act on them. They regulate themselves. They pull back when they realize they're going too far. And then there are others who don't. And that's where it can turn into control, suspicion, or emotional intensity that affects the relationship. Because at its core, Scorpio Venus isn't just jealous for no reason. It comes from a deep need for emotional security, exclusivity, and trust. But without self awareness, that same need can turn into fear of loss or trying to control the situation to avoid being hurt. So the difference isn't the feeling itself, it's how it's handled. And this same depth shows up very strongly in how Scorpio Venus experiences attraction and intimacy. Because for them, sex is rarely just physical. A lot of them describe it as something that requires emotional connection, trust, and depth. It's not just about chemistry, it's about feeling bonded to the person. They can have a very strong physical drive, but still feel completely uninterested in casual experiences because without emotional attachment, it feels empty, unfulfilling. They're not just seeking attraction, they're seeking something deeper, something immersive, something that feels like both people are fully present, fully open, and completely exposed in that moment. And without that, it just doesn't hit the same. When Scorpio Venus does fall into something real, they don't hold back. They tend to love deeply, accept all parts of a person, and stay loyal, sometimes even past the point they should. But there's one condition that sits underneath all of it: trust. Because the same depth that allows them to love someone fully also makes betrayal hit that much harder. And if that trust is broken, you'll often see a complete shift from emotional closeness to distance, detachment, or even cutting someone off entirely. It's very all or nothing. And because they're aware of how deeply they can feel, some Scorpio Venus actually try to avoid love altogether. Not because they don't want it, but because they know how much it can affect them when it goes wrong. But one of the most important patterns that comes up over time is this: it does get easier. Scorpio Venus starts to recognize these patterns in themselves. They become more aware of when they're getting pulled in, when they're overanalyzing, when they're assigning meaning too quickly. And instead of immediately following that feeling, they pause, they question it, and that pause changes everything.